The rifle kicks against my shoulder at 03:47 hours. Through the scope, I watch the enemy commander drop 420 meters away, mid-gesture, like a marionette with cut strings. 10 of his soldiers already lie in the snow behind him, scattered across the white void like dark seeds on fresh canvas. The radio erupts in my ear. Static, then voices overlapping in controlled panic. "Oh, P7, what the hell is happening on your sector?" I key the mic with fingers I can barely feel. The cold has worked past 3 layers of gloves, past skin settling into bone. My voice comes out steady, flat, the way they taught us at Fort Benning when the world is ending and you need to sound like you're ordering coffee. "Sector secure, enemy platoon strength assault broken, 11 KIA, silence on the other end. 3 seconds of dead air that feels like 3 hours. Then OP7 stand by for QRF. Do not engage further. Repeat, do not engage." I lower the handset and let myself exhale. One long breath that fogs white in the sub-zero air before the wind rips it away. My hands are shaking now, not from fear, from cold and adrenaline and the weight of what I just did. 3 weeks ago, they called this post a joke, a place to warehouse soldiers they didn't know what to do with, a checkbox on a duty roster that nobody bothered reading twice. 17 minutes ago, I stopped asking for permission and started doing my job. In 72 hours, I'll stand before a tribunal. Officers with pressed uniforms and law degrees will ask me why I disobeyed direct orders, why I engaged without authorization, why I thought I knew better than my chain of command. But first, I have to survive what comes next, because the enemy isn't finished, and neither is Captain Derek Aldrich. My name is Jade Winters. I'm 27 years old. I've been Army infantry for 6 years, sniper qualified for 4, 2 combat deployments, 16 months downrange total, 12 confirmed long-range engagements before tonight. And for the past 3 weeks, I've been invisible. That's about to change. 3 weeks earlier, the briefing room at Fort Wainwright smelled like burnt coffee and the particular funk of too many soldiers in too small a space. January in Alaska means nobody wants to be outside longer than necessary, so we pack into heated rooms and tolerate each other's proximity. Lieutenant Garrett Thorne stood at the front reading from a duty roster that might as well have been a grocery list for all the enthusiasm in his voice. Young officer, maybe 26. West Point ring on his finger catching fluorescent light every time he gestured. Good kid. Meant well. Meant well doesn't count for much when you're 2 rungs down from the people who actually make decisions. Eastern Observation Post, Thorne said, scanning the room. OP7, I'm assigning. The door opened. Captain Derek Aldrich walked in like he owned the building. 38 years old, operations officer. The kind of leader who mistakes rank for competence and silence for respect. His uniform was perfect. Creases sharp enough to cut paper. Boots polished to a mirror shine that probably took his junior enlisted soldiers an hour to achieve. Everything about him screamed professional soldier. Everything except his eyes. Those told a different story. The eyes of a man who'd learned to hide inadequacy behind authority, to bury mistakes under paperwork, to survive by making sure nobody looked too close. Send Winters, my Aldrich said. Not suggested, not recommended, ordered. The room went quiet. That particular kind of silence that happens when everybody knows something wrong just occurred, but nobody has the rank to challenge it. Thorne blinked. Sir, I was planning to assign. I know what you were planning, Lieutenant. Aldrich's voice carried the weight of 3 ranks and 10 years of service. Send Winters to OP7. Perfect assignment for our diversity initiative. His eyes found mine across the room. 20 pairs of boots shuffled on linoleum. throats cleared. Gazes dropped to study fingernails and bootlaces and the water stains on the acoustic ceiling tiles. I stayed still, hands folded in my lap, face neutral. The mask I'd learned to wear somewhere between basic training and the moment I realized that competence wouldn't protect me from this. From men like Aldrich who saw my gender before they saw my service record. "Sir," Thorne tried again, and I had to respect the attempt. "Corporal Winters has sniper qualifications, expert marksman. Her skills might be better utilized in scout platoon. I run operations lieutenant." Aldrich's smile didn't touch his eyes. "She goes east, OP7, guard duty." He paused, letting the words settle like dust. "Where she can't cause any complications." The briefing continued, assignments distributed, logistics reviewed, standard pre-deployment procedures that I'd heard 100 times before. I sat there and listened to my career being dismissed in 3 sentences. Diversity initiative, guard duty, complications. When the briefing ended, soldiers filed out. A few glanced my way, sympathy in some eyes. Relief in others, relief that they weren't the ones being buried on the eastern flank, where nothing ever happened and nothing ever would. Private Declan Mackenzie paused by my seat. 19 years old, supply specialist, still baby-faced despite 6 months in Alaska. His grandfather was Sergeant Major Rowan Mackenzie, retired a legend in certain circles. The kid had inherited the name, but not yet the gravitas. "That was messed up," he whispered. I shook my head once. "Don't." He left. I sat in the empty briefing room and stared at the map on the wall. Fort Wainwright spread across topographical lines and grid coordinates. Western approach marked with red hatching, threat axis, intelligence assessment, probable enemy avenue of advance. OP7 sat on the eastern edge, a small square symbol. No hatching, no assessment, just a position that existed because doctrine said you covered all approaches, even the ones that didn't matter. I studied that map for 10 minutes, memorizing terrain, distance, dead zones. The things that would matter when theory became reality. Because I'd learned something in 6 years of service, 4 years of combat deployments, 16 months of actually getting shot at, while people back home argued about politics and posted pictures of their lunch. I'd learned that the things everybody agrees can't happen are usually the things that kill you. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not unusual. Sleep and I have had a complicated relationship since my first deployment. Since the IED that killed Specialist Kozlowski and should have killed me. I pulled out my laptop, opened the encrypted files I'd kept since leaving active combat rotation. Personnel records, after-action reports, the paper trail that follows every soldier like a shadow. I searched for Aldrich, Captain Derek Aldrich, West Point class of 2009, commissioned infantry, deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, Lebanon, on paper a solid officer, combat experience, multiple awards, the kind of career that leads to major, then lieutenant colonel, then a comfortable retirement with a pension and a consulting job. But I've learned to read between the lines of military records, the things that don't get written down, the gaps that tell you more than the citations. 3 names kept appearing in his history, soldiers who'd served under him, soldiers who'd filed reports, raised concerns, asked questions that apparently didn't have good answers. Sergeant Bryn Holloway, Beirut deployment 8 years ago. I found her report buried in an archived database. Enemy movement patterns she'd identified. Specific, detailed, actionable intelligence. Aldrich had dismissed it, called it speculation, refused to adjust defensive posture. 6 days later, the attack came exactly where Holloway predicted. 6 soldiers wounded, 2 critically. 1 lost use of his left arm. The other still walks with a cane according to the VA disability filing I found cross-referenced in another database. Holloway was transferred out 2 weeks after the attack. No promotion, no commendation for accurate intelligence, just a reassignment to a logistics unit in Germany where her tactical insights wouldn't embarrass anyone. Corporal Marcus Webb. Iraq deployment 5 years ago. Supply chain discrepancies. Equipment requisitions that didn't match inventory. Webb had raised the issue through proper channels, documented everything, followed procedure exactly. His report never made it past Aldrich's desk. Webb left the Army 6 months later. General discharge. Not honorable, not dishonorable. The kind of separation that happens when somebody decides you're more trouble than you're worth and nobody wants to do the paperwork to prove it. Specialist Tessa Carver, Afghanistan 2 years ago. Training deficiency in defensive protocols, gaps in overlapping fields of fire. Carver had identified the problem. Proposed solutions did exactly what good soldiers are supposed to do. Aldrich gave her non-judicial punishment for disrespect to a superior officer. 3 soldiers, 3 deployments, 3 instances of competent enlisted personnel identifying problems that Aldrich couldn't or wouldn't address. I saw the pattern. Aldrich didn't tolerate being questioned, didn't tolerate subordinates who noticed things he'd missed, and he had the rank to make dissent disappear into the bureaucratic machinery of the Army, especially when that dissent came from enlisted soldiers, especially when it came from women. The memory hit without warning. Helmand Province. 9 months ago. Root copper shimmering in 110-degree heat. I was in the back of the lead MRAP scanning through my rifle scope as we rolled. Standard convoy security. Eyes on the horizon, looking for threats that intelligence said weren't there. Then I saw it. Disturbed earth on the north side of the road. 2 meters long. Uniform edges. Fresh digging. The kind of pattern that screamed IED to anyone who'd been trained to look. I keyed the intercom. Contact front, possible IED. North side 150 meters. Staff Sergeant Kyle Brennan's voice came back from the turret, dismissive, already deciding I was wrong before he looked. Route was cleared 2 hours ago, Winters. Intel says we're good. Sergeant, the dig marks are fresh, within the last... Keep moving. His tone ended the discussion. I watched that patch of disturbed earth slide past my window, watched it disappear in our dust trail, felt my jaw tighten, but said nothing. What could I say? I was a corporal. He was a staff sergeant. He had the intel brief. I just had my eyes and my training and a bad feeling that apparently didn't count for shit. 36 hours later, I was in the TOC when the radio call came in. IED, strike root copper, mass casualty, request medevac immediate. My stomach dropped. Grid oi, the operations officer asked. They read it. I didn't need to check the map. I knew exactly where it was. The same spot I'd identified, the same patch of earth I'd called out. 3 wounded, 1 critical. I ran to the landing zone, watched the medevac bird come in hot, watched them unload the casualties. Specialist Andrew Kozlowski was screaming, the kind of screaming that doesn't sound human, the kind that comes when pain exceeds what the brain can process. His right leg was gone below the knee, just gone, wrapped in tourniquets and trauma dressings that were already soaked through. The medics were working on him, calling out vitals, pushing fluids. But his eyes found mine across the LZ. He didn't know who I was, didn't know I'd called it, didn't know I could have saved his leg if anyone had listened. But I knew. I stood there watching them load him on the bird, watching the pilot spool up, watching the medevac lift off into the Afghan sky carrying pieces of a man who should have been whole. EOD went back to the site, confirmed the device had been emplaced 48 hours prior, right where I'd identified it, right where I'd called it, right where Staff Sergeant Brennan had decided I was wrong. He found me in the chow hall that night, sat down across from me, didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge, just said, "Shit happens, Winters, move on." Like Kozlowski's leg was an acceptable loss. Like being right didn't matter, because I was just a corporal and he was a staff sergeant and the chain of command protected him from consequence. I didn't move on. I carried it, the weight of being right and watching someone pay for being ignored. The guilt that lived in my chest like shrapnel you couldn't remove. And now it was happening again. Different commander, different location, same pattern. I stared at my laptop screen, at the names, Holloway, Webb, Carver, Kozlowski. I wouldn't be number 5, not this time. I closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling of my barracks room. Pipes creaked overhead. Somewhere down the hall, someone was watching a movie with the volume too loud. Explosions and gunfire. Hollywood's version of war, all spectacle and heroism and last-minute rescues. The real thing is quieter, colder. It happens in the spaces between the explosions when you're alone and nobody's watching, and the choice you make determines who goes home and who doesn't. I thought about OP7, about being buried on the eastern flank, about what would happen if the intelligence was wrong and the attack came from the direction nobody was watching. And I thought about doing something different this time. 2 days before I deployed to OP7, Sergeant Major Rowan Mackenzie visited me at the base gym. I was running through PT trying to work the tension out of muscles that had been tight since the briefing. Rowan was 68 years old, retired 5 years ago after 43 years in uniform. Operation Desert Storm, 2 tours in Iraq, Bronze Star with V device. The kind of soldier people write books about, except he'd never cooperated with the authors. He was also my father's closest friend. My father, Everett Winters, died when I was 21. Helicopter crashed during a training exercise at Fort Campbell. 6 years ago, last November. No combat glory, no dramatic sacrifice, no enemy to blame. Just mechanical failure and bad weather, and the kind of random chance that reminds you the universe doesn't care about fairness. The Army gave him full honors, 21-gun salute, folded flag, taps played by a specialist who looked barely old enough to shave. My mother took the flag and the condolences and the pension. She moved to Arizona, remarried, started a life that didn't include daily reminders of what she'd lost. I stayed in, finished my enlistment, re-enlisted, went to sniper school. Did the work my father had taught me to value even when nobody was watching. Rowan had been there through all of it, not overbearing, not trying to replace my father, just present, available, the kind of steady presence that matters more than grand gestures. He found me on the weight bench working through reps that had more to do with anger management than strength training. "You're going to hurt yourself," he said, by way of greeting. I racked the bar and sat up. "Sergeant Major." "Rowan, I'm retired. The rank doesn't follow me to civilian gym equipment." He sat on the bench across from me, moving with the careful deliberation of a man whose body had done hard things for a long time. "I heard about your assignment. OP7, guard duty. Living the dream. Aldrich is a bastard." I grabbed my water bottle, didn't respond. "Your father saved my life twice," Rowan continued. He pulled a photo from his wallet, old, creased. 2 soldiers in desert camouflage, younger versions of themselves somewhere in Iraq, where the sand stretched to the horizon and the heat made everything shimmer. My father's face stared back at me, grinning, sunburned, alive. "Once in Fallujah," Rowan said quietly. "Sniper had me pinned. Your dad flanked the position, neutralized the threat, dragged me to cover, took fire the whole way." He paused. "Once in a bar fight in Fayetteville. I was drunk and stupid. He was sober and smart, saved me from a dishonorable discharge and probably a felony assault charge." He almost smiled. Almost. I owe him more than I can repay, but I can look after his daughter. I don't need looking after Sergeant Major. I know. His eyes met mine. But you need someone who'll tell you the truth when brass won't listen. Aldrich is dirty jade. Not drugs, not theft, something worse. Incompetence. Incompetence he hides by silencing people who notice. Rowan leaned forward. I pulled his records. I still have friends in personnel. Everywhere he served good soldiers end up transferred, discharged, or buried under paperwork. The pattern is clear once you know to look for it. I thought about Holloway, Webb, Carver, Kozlowski. What do I do? Your job, nothing more, nothing less. He stood, joints popping. But watch your back, and if things go sideways, document everything. Aldrich survives by making problems disappear. Don't let him disappear you. He started to leave, then stopped, turned back. Declan's in second squad, my grandson. You've met him. Good kid. He is, and I'd like him to stay that way. Rowan's voice was quiet. Your father used to say something. Do it right even when nobody's watching. Especially then. That's when character shows. He left me in the gym with the photo of my father and the weight of inherited expectations. I finished my workout, showered, went back to my barracks. That night, I started preparing for OP7 like it mattered, because in 2 weeks, it would matter more than anyone expected. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in the 2 weeks before deployment. Alaska winter asserting itself with the kind of cold that makes exposed skin burn and breath freeze in your lungs. I used the time. Every off-duty hour I was on the range, zeroing my M24 sniper rifle in conditions that made most soldiers stay inside. Dawn shoots when the cold made steel contract and ballistics shift. Midday sessions when brief warmth changed everything. Dusk work when temperature dropped again and you had to recalculate every variable. I built wind tables. Alaska wind doesn't behave like wind in other places. It comes off the mountains with malicious intent, gusting and swirling and changing direction, like it's personally offended by the concept of predictable patterns. I tested ammunition. Hand-loaded rounds I'd assembled in my barracks room, measuring powder charges down to individual kernels, seeding primers with micrometer precision. Each round a small act of control in a situation where I had very little. I memorized OP7's terrain from topographical maps and satellite imagery. Boulder cluster at 600 meters bearing 075 degrees. Lightning struck spruce at 900 meters bearing 082. Collapsed stone wall at 1,100 meters bearing 068. Landmarks I could use when visibility dropped to nothing, and the only thing between me and the enemy was memory and training. Nobody noticed. Why would they? OP7 was the joke post, the place where nothing happened. Previous guards had brought paperback novels and contraband energy drinks and treated it like paid vacation with worse weather. I brought sandbags. 40 trips up the tower ladder, 1 bag at a time, building a proper firing position. Windbreak that didn't interfere with sight lines. Reinforced supports. A position that could sustain extended engagement instead of just providing shelter from the weather. I cleared fields of fire, removed branches that might deflect around, noted dead zones where terrain would hide enemy movement, built a mental map of every fold and depression in the ground that mattered. I did the work. The invisible work that happens when nobody's watching and nobody cares. The work my father had taught me to value even when it earned no recognition, no promotion, no acknowledgement that it existed at all. 1 week before deployment, I was dropping off range cards at the operations tent when I overheard something that made my blood freeze. Aldrich was on the phone back to me, didn't notice I'd entered. Western intel is solid, sir. I've personally verified threat axis. Enemy will come from the west. I stake my career on it. I froze. On his desk, partially obscured by a coffee mug, I saw the actual intel assessment. I shouldn't read classified documents, but the heading was visible: Threat Axis Analysis. Eastern Approach Viable Under Adverse Weather. Aldrich was telling battalion commander the opposite of what intelligence actually said. I backed out silently. Later, I found Lieutenant Thorne in the chow hall. "Sir, I need to report something. Captain Aldrich may be misrepresenting." "Stop." Thorne's voice was quiet. "Do you have proof? I saw the intel report. It contradicts his briefing. Did you photograph it, record him, have a witness?" "No, sir." "Then you have nothing, and Aldrich has the battalion commander's confidence." He met my eyes. "I believe you, Winters, but belief isn't evidence, and going after a captain without evidence will end your career." I understood what he wasn't saying. He wouldn't protect me if I pushed this. So I prepared differently. I spent the remaining week turning OP7 from a joke into a fortress. Because if the attack came east when it came east, I'd be alone. And Aldrich would let me die rather than admit he was wrong. On my last night before deployment, I cleaned my rifle one final time, disassembled it completely, examined every component: spring tension, firing pin, bolt face, the small mechanical details that separate reliable from catastrophic. My hands moved through the familiar ritual, movements I'd performed 1,000 times, muscle memory that ran deeper than conscious thought. I thought about my father, about the photo Rowan had shown me, about a man who'd saved his friend's life twice and then died in a training accident because helicopters fail and weather turns and the universe doesn't distinguish between heroes and anyone else. I thought about what he'd told me when I was 14, learning to shoot on our property in rural Tennessee, before the Army, before war, before I understood what it meant to hold someone's life in the mathematics of windage and elevation. "Do it right," he'd said, steadying my elbow, correcting my cheek weld. "Even when nobody's watching, especially then. That's when it matters most. Because the day will come when somebody's life depends on the work you did when you thought it didn't matter." I reassembled the rifle. Function check, dry fire, everything smooth. Outside snow was starting to fall. Weather report said a major storm system was moving in. Arctic blast from Canada, the kind of cold that makes combat operations nearly impossible. Nearly. I set my alarm for 0400, packed my gear, laid out my cold weather layers in the order I'd done them, and I tried to sleep knowing that in less than 72 hours, everything would change. The blizzard hit exactly when the meteorologists predicted. For once, the forecasters earned their paychecks. I'd been on OP7 for 8 hours when the wind started picking up. By midnight, visibility dropped to 50 meters. By 0200, I could barely see 30. The tower shook with each gust. Wood creaking, ice forming on every surface, temperature at -18 Fahrenheit and dropping. My radio crackled with activity from the western sector. Captain Aldrich's voice, calm and authoritative, coordinating defensive positions. Lieutenant Thorne acknowledging orders. Sergeant Richmond reporting his squad in position. Everything focused west. Every machine gun, every mortar tube, every thermal optic and night vision device. The entire battalion's combat power oriented toward the direction intelligence said the enemy would come. I sat alone on the eastern flank and listened to them prepare for a battle that would happen somewhere else. At 0347, I heard metal on metal, faint, almost lost in the wind, but distinct. The particular sound of equipment rattling against equipment, rifles bumping load-bearing vests, magazine pouches clicking against buckles, sounds that didn't belong in an empty wilderness during a blizzard. I keyed my radio. OP7 to actual. Possible movement indicators bearing 075 approximately 800 meters. Aldrich's response came back immediately. OP7 atmospheric conditions create auditory distortions. Maintain watch. Translation: You're hearing things. Stop wasting my time. I lowered the handset and brought my rifle scope to my eye, scanned the white void where sound had come from. Nothing, just snow and wind and the absence of visibility. I waited. At 0417, the wind dropped for maybe 10 seconds. A brief lull in the storm, a gap in the white curtain, and through that gap I saw them. Shapes moving through the boulder cluster. 4, 8, 12, more behind them. Tactical spacing, disciplined bounds. Professional soldiers moving with purpose through conditions that should have made movement impossible. My breath caught. This wasn't a probe. This wasn't a lost patrol. This was a deliberate assault. Platoon strength, 30-plus combatants, coming from the east while every eye in the battalion looked west. I keyed the radio, forcing my voice to stay level. OP7 to actual. Visual confirmation. Enemy platoon strength element bearing 075, range 600 meters. Request immediate fire support. Aldrich's voice had an edge now, irritation bleeding through professional calm. Negative OP7. Western sector is engaged. All fires allocated west. Do not clog this net with unconfirmed reports. Sir, I have visual confirmation. I gave you an order, Corporal. Clear this frequency. The radio went silent. I sat in the tower and felt the weight of that silence, felt the familiar pattern repeating, felt the ghosts of Bryn Holloway and Marcus Webb and Tessa Carver and Andrew Kozlowski standing beside me, felt the absence of my father who'd taught me to do the work right even when nobody was watching. I made a decision. My phone was mounted on a sandbag positioned to capture both my firing position and the eastern approach. I'd set it up 2 days ago. Insurance, documentation. The kind of evidence Rowan had told me to collect. I tapped record. This is Corporal Jade Winters, OP7, January 14th, 0440 hours. I have visual confirmation of enemy platoon advancing on eastern approach. I have requested fire support 3 times. Captain Aldrich has denied all requests. I am engaging with available weapons. I loaded my first round, premium hand load, 168 grain Sierra Match King, 3 weeks of preparation distilled into one perfect cartridge. The enemy point man was at 620 meters, wind 18 knots from the northeast, temperature minus 20. Cold air denser than warm, changing how bullets fly. I'd tested for this, built tables, done the mathematics. I adjusted my scope. 3.2 mils left for windage, 1.8 mils up for elevation and cold air density. My breathing slowed. 4 counts in, hold, 6 counts out. Heartbeat dropped. 54 beats per minute, 48. 42. The world contracted to crosshairs and wind and a man 620 meters away who didn't know he was about to die. I settled the reticle on his center mass, exhaled halfway, found the natural respiratory pause where everything steadies. My finger took up slack on the trigger, 3.5 pounds of pressure until the break. I pressed. The rifle cracked. Recoil punched my shoulder. Through the scope, I watched the point man drop. Clean, instant. One moment walking forward through snow, the next collapsing like a building losing structural support. The enemy element froze, confusion visible even at distance. They clustered around their fallen soldier, checking for vitals, scanning the white void for threats they couldn't identify. In the chaos of the western firefight and the howling blizzard, nobody had heard my shot. They thought it was a casualty, cold, heart attack, bad luck, not a sniper. I worked the bolt, smooth, practiced. 10,000 repetitions across 4 years made the movement automatic. Brass ejected, tumbled through air, clinked against wood flooring. I chambered the next round and spoke into my phone's microphone. 0442, enemy team leader 580 meters, engaging. He'd moved forward to check the point man, exposed himself. Fatal mistake. I calculated, breathed, pressed. The rifle spoke again. The team leader dropped. 9 more to go. And somewhere in the back of my mind, past the training and the focus and the cold professional calm, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Not for me, not for Captain Aldrich, not for anyone who'd dismissed the eastern flank as a joke and put me here thinking I didn't matter. They were about to learn different. The third shot came 90 seconds later, their radio operator. I could identify him by the antenna protruding from his pack, a thin whip of metal that caught what little light penetrated the storm. He was crouched behind a snow-covered boulder, trying to call in what was happening, trying to make sense of 2 men down in conditions where enemy contact shouldn't be possible. Range 610 meters. Wind gusting harder now, 20 knots with spikes to 24. The mathematics got more complicated with every variable that changed. I dialed my scope, 4.1 mils windage, 2 mils elevation. The cold was affecting everything. Air density, powder burn rate. Even the steel of my barrel contracted in the sub-zero temperature, changing the harmonics of how the bullet left the muzzle. Most soldiers never learned these things. Most soldiers didn't need to. They carried M4 carbines designed for close-range work where you pointed and shot, and the enemy was close enough that minor variations didn't matter. But I wasn't most soldiers. I'd spent 3 weeks preparing for this exact moment, for these exact conditions, for the mathematics of death at distance when nobody believed it would matter. The radio operator was still transmitting when my bullet arrived. I watched through the scope as he collapsed mid-word, the handset falling from his grip into the snow. Their communications net went silent. I spoke into my phone. 0445. Enemy radio operator 610 meters. Communications disrupted. Enemy now blind and deaf. My hands moved through the bolt cycle. Muscle memory so deep I didn't need conscious thought. Eject, load, close. The rhythm of it was almost meditative. The same movements I'd performed 10,000 times on ranges from Georgia to Alaska, from training to combat, from the moment I decided this was the work that mattered. The enemy soldiers were starting to understand. Not just casualties, not just bad luck or cold-related failures. They were under attack. Precision fire from an unknown position. A ghost in the blizzard picking them apart one shot at a time. They scattered, professional soldiers reverting to training, seeking cover, trying to identify the threat axis. But the storm made that impossible. My elevation gave me clear sight lines they couldn't match. My flash suppressor hid muzzle signature, and the sound of my shots was lost in wind that screamed across the tundra like something alive and angry. I was invisible, and I was hunting. Shot 4, a PKM machine gunner setting up on a low rise, trying to establish a support by fire position. I could see him adjusting the bipod legs settling behind the weapon, with the careful movements of someone who knew his craft. He was good, professional, dangerous. He died before he could chamber the first belt. Range 590 meters, center mass, clean hit. He slumped over his weapon and didn't move. I worked the bolt and spoke my documentation. 0448, enemy machine gunner 590 meters, crew served weapon neutralized before employment. 4 down. The enemy advance had stalled completely. What had been a coordinated assault was now a scattered group of soldiers trying to survive an invisible threat they couldn't fight. My radio crackled. All units Western Sector reports enemy contact broken. Hostiles withdrawing. Prepare to pursue. Aldrich's voice, calm, authoritative, the voice of a commander who thought he'd just won. He had no idea the real battle was happening 3 kilometers east. Had no idea I was holding a platoon-strength assault alone. Had no idea his career was ending with every round I fired. I keyed my mic one more time, gave them another chance. OP7 to actual, Eastern assault in progress, enemy taking casualties, 4 confirmed KYA, request fire support or reinforcement. The response came back clipped, annoyed. OP7, maintain radio discipline. Western sector is priority. Continue observation and report only confirmed developments. I lowered the handset. Confirmed developments. I just killed 4 enemy soldiers in 5 minutes, and he wanted more confirmation. Fine, I'd give him confirmation. Shot 5, an enemy soldier trying to flank left through a shallow draw. Moving fast using terrain the way they'd been trained. Good tactical sense. Would have worked against a conventional defensive position. Wouldn't work against me. I led his movement. Calculated where he'd be in the half-second it took my bullet to arrive, adjusted for his speed, for the wind, for the angle as he moved across the slope. I pressed the trigger. He went down at 540 meters, tumbled into the draw, and didn't come back up. 0450, enemy flanking element leader 540 meters, maneuver defeated. My shoulder was starting to ache from recoil. 16 rounds through a bolt-action rifle in quick succession will do that. The bruise would be spectacular tomorrow, purple and green spreading across my shoulder like abstract art. If there was a tomorrow. If Aldrich didn't have me arrested the moment I came off this tower. I pushed the thought away, focused on the work. The enemy was still out there, still dangerous, still trying to find a way to accomplish their mission, despite losing a quarter of their force to a threat they couldn't see. Shot 6. Another machine gunner. This one had learned from his dead comrade's mistake. He was setting up and defilade behind cover, only the top of his helmet visible. Smart, not smart enough. I waited, patient, cold seeping through my layers despite the insulated suit, fingers going numb inside my gloves. But I'd trained for this too, knew how to work through the cold, how to maintain fine motor control when your body wanted to shut down and seek warmth. The machine gunner shifted position, raised his head to scan for targets. Fatal mistake. Range 615 meters. Difficult angle. Partial concealment. I aimed for the exposed portion of his head, a shot that would have been impossible for most snipers. A shot I'd practiced 100 times because I knew someday it would matter. The rifle cracked. Through my scope, I saw pink mist. The machine gunner disappeared behind his cover and didn't reappear. 0453, second enemy machine gunner, eliminated. 6 down. And then I saw something that made my blood freeze colder than the wind. 2 enemy soldiers were trying to evacuate their wounded, dragging casualties toward the rear, attempting what any good soldier would do, what I'd been trained to do. Never leave a man behind. My crosshairs settled on the lead evacuator. My finger found the trigger, and I stopped. This was the moment. The choice that would define everything that came after. These weren't combatants preparing to shoot at me. These were soldiers trying to save their wounded. The rules of engagement were clear. Proportional force, legitimate military targets, don't shoot medics, don't shoot wounded. The laws of war written by people who'd never sat alone in a freezing tower watching enemy soldiers through a scope. But these weren't marked medics, and their wounded were still armed combatants who could return to the fight if given medical attention. And every second I hesitated was a second they could reorganize, regroup, renew their assault. I thought about the 47 soldiers in my battalion, thought about Declan Mackenzie, 19 years old, whose grandfather had asked me to keep him safe. Thought about all the people sleeping in warm barracks 3 kilometers west who had no idea this assault was happening because Aldrich wouldn't listen. I thought about Kozlowski screaming on that medevac bird, about the leg he lost because nobody listened to me. Not this time. I made my choice. Shot 7, lead evacuator, center mass, 605 meters. He dropped. Shot 8, second evacuator. He'd frozen when his partner fell, just stood there exposed trying to process what was happening. I didn't give him time to process. 0456, 2 enemy attempting casualty evacuation, both neutralized, asset denial complete. My voice was steady as I spoke into the phone, professional, clinical, the mask I wore to keep from thinking too hard about what I was doing, about the fact that I'd just shot 2 men trying to save their friends, about the fact that it was the right decision and I'd make it again, and I'd never fully forgive myself for it. This was what they didn't tell you in sniper school. The mechanics, yes. The ballistics, absolutely. The technical skills required to place a round on target at impossible distances in terrible conditions. But not this. Not the weight that settled into your chest when you did everything right and it still felt wrong. Not the knowledge that you'd carry these moments forever, playing them back in quiet hours when you couldn't sleep and the world was dark and you were alone with your choices. I worked the bolt, loaded the next round, scanned for targets, 8 down, 22 still out there, and they were starting to adapt. 3 kilometers west, Sergeant Cole Richmond was repositioning 3rd Squad when he caught movement through a gap in the snow. A brief clearing in the blizzard, maybe 5 seconds of visibility, but enough. He raised his binoculars, adjusted focus. His breath stopped. Enemy soldiers, dozens of them, eastern approach, and they were taking fire, precision fire. He watched through his optics as another soldier fell. Clean shot, professional work, long range. Richmond had been Army infantry for 20 years, 4 deployments. He knew what he was looking at: single shooter, excellent field craft, systematic target selection. He keyed his radio breaking into the command net. Actual, this is 3-6, contact report, enemy platoon strength, eastern approach grid, November Delta 4728. They're engaged. Someone's already engaging. Captain Aldrich's voice came back confused, irritated. Say again, 3-6, eastern approach engaged by what unit? Richmond watched another enemy soldier drop through his binoculars. The shot so precise, so clean, that he knew exactly who was shooting even before he said it. Unknown, sir. Precision fire. Long range. Single shooter. I think. He paused, the weight of what he was about to say settling on him. Jesus, I think it's OP7. 3 seconds of dead air on the radio. Richmond counted them. 1, 2, 3. Then Aldrich's voice, different now, uncertain. OP7 is Winters, Corporal Winters. Sir, whoever's shooting is shredding them. I'm watching it happen. Professional work. She's holding that flank by herself. More silence. Richmond could practically hear Aldrich's mind working through the implications. Could hear the moment when the operations officer realized that his dismissed reports, his refusal to reinforce his absolute certainty about the Western threat axis was wrong. Catastrophically wrong. Lieutenant Thorne's voice cut in. 3-6, confirm. You're observing OP7 engaging enemy forces. Affirmative, sir. I count. Hold on. Richmond swept his binoculars across the eastern approach, counted bodies in the snow. At least 8 enemy KIA, possibly more. And she's still engaging. And in the operations center, Thorne was pulling files. His hands shook slightly as he opened the folder he'd barely glanced at 3 weeks ago. The folder labeled Winters Jade, CPL. He read it now, really read it. Every line, every qualification, every deployment, every commendation he'd missed because he'd been too busy following Aldrich's orders to do his job properly. U.S. Army Sniper School, Distinguished Honor Graduate. expert marksman badge with 3 qualification bars, combat infantry badge, 2 deployments, 16 months combat, 12 confirmed engagements, long-range precision, and at the bottom a note from her previous platoon commander. Corporal Winters possesses exceptional fieldcraft and marksmanship. Recommend immediate assignment to Battalion Scout Sniper Section. Asset is being underutilized in current role. Thorne's face went pale. His hands trembled holding the folder. I put one of the best snipers in the division on guard duty, he whispered to the empty operations center, on the one post I thought was worthless. The weight of that realization crushed him. Every dismissed report, every time he'd backed Aldrich instead of listening to her, every moment of the past 3 weeks when he could have done something different and hadn't. He grabbed his radio. All units, this is Actual 6. Prepare to reinforce Eastern Sector. OP7 has confirmed enemy contact. Platoon strength. We're moving now. But Aldrich's voice overrode him. Captain's rank trumping lieutenant's authority. Negative. Western Sector is priority. Maintain current posture. OP7 will continue observation. Thorne stared at his radio. Sir Corporal Winters is engaging alone. She needs support. She has her orders, as do you, Lieutenant. Aldrich's tone brooked no argument. Maintain Western focus. That's final. Richmond, still watching through his binoculars, saw another enemy soldier fall. 9 down now, maybe 10. He keyed his mic again, voice tight with barely controlled anger. Sir, she's not observing. She's fighting. And she's winning, but she can't hold forever. Meanwhile, at the base perimeter, 3 vehicles pulled up to the main gate. The guard on duty, a specialist barely 20 years old, approached with his hand on his sidearm. 3 people got out. 2 women, 1 man, civilians. The guard relaxed slightly. I'm sorry, folks, base is closed. No visitors during training exercises. The older woman stepped forward. 46 years old, graying hair eyes that had seen things the guard couldn't imagine. I'm Bryn Holloway. I need to speak to Colonel Marcus Vance immediately. Ma'am, I can't just... I'm a former Army sergeant. I served under Captain Derek Aldrich in Beirut 8 years ago. I filed reports about enemy movement patterns that he dismissed. 6 soldiers were wounded because he wouldn't listen. Her voice was steel. And right now, according to my scanner, he's doing it again. A soldier is in contact on the eastern approach and he's refusing support. The guard hesitated, looked at the other 2 visitors. The man stepped forward. Marcus Webb, 42 years old, former corporal, general discharge that still stung like an open wound. I served under Aldrich in Iraq. Supply chain issues I reported. He buried my findings. I can prove it. The second woman, Tessa Carver, 34, specialist discharged after non-judicial punishment. Afghanistan, 2 years ago. He punished me for identifying training deficiencies that could have saved lives. The guard looked at 3 civilians who'd driven through an Alaskan blizzard to reach the base, looked at their faces, saw the truth there, saw the pattern. He made a decision that would probably cost him rank. Wait here. He called a sergeant, explained the situation. The sergeant called the officer of the day. The officer of the day, a captain who'd been woken from sleep and wasn't happy about it, listened to 3 civilians explain why they needed to see the battalion commander, and something in their voices, some weight of truth that couldn't be faked, made him pick up the phone. Colonel Marcus Vance was in the Tactical Operations Center when the call came through. 54 years old, 2 silver stars, 3 bronze stars, 28 years in uniform. He'd seen combat in places most Americans couldn't find on a map, had made decisions that kept him awake at night, had learned to trust his instincts when something felt wrong. This felt wrong. He listened to the captain, listened to the names, Holloway, Webb, Carver, pattern victims from Aldrich's previous deployments. He listened to the radio traffic, Richmond reporting Eastern contact, Aldrich dismissing it, Thorne trying to reinforce, Aldrich overriding, and he listened to the part of his brain that had kept him alive through 3 wars, the part that was screaming that his operations officer was making a catastrophic mistake. "Bring them to the TOC," Vance said. "Now." On OP7, I was running low on ammunition. I'd started with 23 rounds, premium handloads and standard military issue mixed together, each one tested, each one trusted. I'd fired 10, 13 left, and the enemy was regrouping. I could see it through my scope. Officers moving among the scattered soldiers, using hand signals, rallying them despite the losses. Professional soldiers who understood that panic was more dangerous than the enemy. They were pulling back scattered elements, consolidating behind cover, preparing for one final push. And then I saw him, the enemy commander. I knew him by the way he moved, the authority in his gestures, the way other soldiers responded to his signals. He was rallying them, organizing them, turning scattered survivors into a coordinated force again. Professional soldier, experienced, dangerous. If I let him finish organizing that assault, they might still break through, might still accomplish their mission despite losing a third of their force. I couldn't let that happen. Range 440 meters, closer than my previous shots. But the conditions were worse. Wind gusting to 26 knots now, snow so heavy I could barely see him through the scope, and he was moving among his soldiers, using them as cover, never fully exposing himself. Smart. I'd have to wait for my shot. I checked my ammunition, ran my fingers across the remaining rounds. 12 standard, 1 special. The special round sat in my palm. Felt heavier than the others even though it weighed the same. Felt important in a way that went beyond physics. I'd assembled this round 3 weeks ago, late night in my barracks room when I couldn't sleep and needed something to occupy my hands. 168 grain Sierra Match King bullet. Match grade powder measured to individual kernels. Lapua brass that I'd annealed and neck turned for perfect concentricity. Federal gold medal match primer seated with micrometer precision. This round represented 15 years of learning my craft. From age 12, shooting with my father on our Tennessee property, to age 27 on a freezing tower in Alaska. Every lesson, every mistake, every moment of practice distilled into one perfect cartridge. I'd saved it for a moment exactly like this. I loaded it into the chamber, closed the bolt, felt it seat with a precision that was almost musical. Through my scope, the enemy commander was still moving, still organizing, still dangerous. I began my breathing cycle. In through the nose, 4 counts, hold, out through barely parted lips, 6 counts. My heartbeat slowed, 50 beats per minute, 45, 40. The world contracted. Everything outside the circle of my scope ceased to exist. No cold, no fear, no Aldrich or Thorne or the tribunal that waited for me. Just crosshairs and wind and mathematics and a man 440 meters away who was about to die without ever knowing who killed him. Wind was gusting, 24 knots steady, spikes to 28. I waited for a lull, patient, controlled, the way they'd taught me at Fort Benning when the instructor had said, I thought like the bullet saw the path before it existed. The commander stopped moving, just for a moment. 3 seconds where he stood still gesturing to soldiers on his left completely exposed. 3 seconds was enough. I dialed my scope. 4.4 mils elevation, 4.1 mils windage. The mathematics were perfect or they were nothing. No middle ground, no partial credit. My finger found the trigger, took up slack. 3.5 pounds of pressure until the break. I exhaled halfway. found the natural respiratory pause where my body steadied, and I pressed. The rifle spoke its final truth. Through the scope, I watched the bullet's flight. Not really. I couldn't see the projectile, but I could see its effects. The way the commander continued his gesture for the 0.94 seconds it took for physics to bridge the gap between us. The way he stopped mid-motion when 168 grains of copper and lead arrived at his center mass. The way he dropped. Clean, final, no drama, just a man who was alive and then wasn't. His soldiers froze. 3 seconds of shock as their leader fell. 3 seconds of vulnerability that professional soldiers couldn't afford. And in those 3 seconds, I saw their assault shatter. Not break, not retreat, shatter. Like glass hitting concrete, like a structure losing its keystone. They'd lost their commander, lost their radio operator, lost their machine gunners, lost a third of their force to a threat they couldn't see, couldn't fight, couldn't escape. Some tried to reach their fallen commander. Others scrambled for deeper cover. The coordinated attack dissolved into individual survival instinct. They began withdrawing, professional at first, discipline holding even in chaos, covering each other, moving in bounds, but withdrawing nonetheless. The eastern assault was broken. I worked the bolt, ejected the spent casing from my perfect round. It tumbled through the air and clinked against the wooden floor with the others. 11 brass casings now, 11 lives ended. 11 families that would receive folded flags and formal condolences. I started to load another round, muscle memory so deep that my hands moved before my brain caught up. And then I stopped. The shooting was over. I lowered my rifle, set it carefully on its rest. My hands were shaking now, not from cold, from adrenaline crash, from the weight of what I'd just done settling onto shoulders that suddenly felt too small to carry it. 17 minutes from first shot to last. 11 enemy soldiers dead. A platoon-strength assault defeated by 1 soldier with 1 rifle, and 3 weeks of invisible preparation. I looked at my phone, still recording, still documenting everything. I spoke into the microphone one final time. 0504. Enemy commander neutralized, enemy assault broken, hostile forces withdrawing, eastern sector secure. My voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, just enough that I'd hear it later when I played back the recording. Hear the moment when the professional mask slipped and the human underneath showed through. I stopped recording, saved the file, multiple backups, cloud storage, local storage, everything I'd need to prove what happened here, because in 72 hours I'd stand before a tribunal. Officers who'd never been in combat would question every decision I made, would ask why I disobeyed orders, why I engaged without authorization, why I thought I knew better than my chain of command. And I'd show them this recording. Let them watch, let them listen. Let them see what happened when competence was dismissed and warnings were ignored and 1 soldier had to choose between following orders and saving lives. My radio erupted, multiple voices overlapping, Richmond reporting enemy withdrawal, Thorne demanding permission to reinforce, and underneath it all, Aldrich's voice, different now, panicked, the calm authority stripped away. OP7, cease fire immediately. You are engaging friendly forces. Cease fire or face court-martial. I stared at the radio, let his words hang in the freezing air. Friendly forces. He was so desperate to be right that he'd rather accuse me of shooting our own soldiers than admit he'd been wrong. I keyed the mic. My voice was steady, cold, professional in a way that his had ceased to be. Negative, sir. Confirmed enemy combatants. 11 KIA. Assault broken. Sector secure. Richmond's voice cut in. Colonel, I have visual confirmation. Those are enemy forces. Corporal Winters just saved the eastern flank. And then a voice I didn't recognize, older, authority that made even Aldrich shut up. Colonel Vance, all units stand by. Captain Aldrich, confine yourself to your quarters immediately. That is a direct order. Silence on the radio, the kind of silence that happens when careers end and everyone knows it, but nobody wants to be the first to say it out loud. Then Aldrich's voice. One last attempt, one final effort to save himself. Sir, I need to access the operations center, delete certain files, intelligence assessments that might be misinterpreted if... Captain, you just requested permission to destroy evidence on an open radio net. Vance's voice could have frozen water. Quarters now. You are relieved of duty pending investigation. I sat in my tower and listened to a man's career die over the radio. Felt nothing. No satisfaction. No triumph. Just exhaustion and cold and the knowledge that the hard part was still coming. 20 minutes later, I heard boots on the ladder. Multiple people climbing. I grabbed my rifle. Force of habit. But my hands were shaking too badly to aim properly, and I knew it. The first head to appear over the edge was Sergeant Richmond. He pulled himself onto the platform, followed by Lieutenant Thorne and 3 soldiers from 2nd Squad. They stopped, just stood there, looking at me, looking at the 11 brass casings scattered across the floor, looking at the rifle and the range cards and the phone still mounted on its sandbag rest. Richmond broke the silence. He was a big man, 6'2", maybe 220. Lines on his face that spoke of hard years and harder decisions. He'd seen combat in places I'd never been. Had done things I could only imagine. He extended his hand. That was the finest shooting I've ever witnessed, Corporal. His voice was rough, emotional in a way that big, tough infantrymen aren't supposed to show. The finest! I shook his hand. My grip was weak, fingers numb, but his was firm and steady and real. Lieutenant Thorne stepped forward. He looked younger than his 26 years. Looked like a kid who'd just learned something important about responsibility and cost and the weight of command decisions. Corporal Winters, His voice failed him. He tried again. I should have listened, should have read your file, should have known what you were capable of. He met my eyes. I'm sorry doesn't cover it. But I am. Sorry. I nodded. Didn't trust my voice yet. One of the 2nd Squad soldiers spoke up. Private Declan Mackenzie, Rowan's grandson, 19 years old and looking at me like I'd just sprouted wings. My grandfather was right about you, he said quietly. He said you were like your father. Said you'd do what needed doing even when nobody was watching. Something broke inside me at those words. Some wall I'd been holding up for the past 3 weeks, for the past 6 years, for the past 17 minutes, while I'd systematically killed 11 human beings to protect people who hadn't believed I mattered. I felt tears on my face, cold turning them to ice before they could fall. I turned away, faced the eastern approach where bodies lay in the snow and the enemy had withdrawn, and the sector was secure because I'd done my job when nobody thought I could. Richmond's hand landed on my shoulder, gentle, the way you'd touch something fragile that might break. Take your time, Corporal. You've earned it. I stood there and let myself feel it, all of it. The fear and the anger and the exhaustion and the cost of being right when everyone else was wrong. Stood there and cried in front of 4 soldiers, while the wind howled and the snow fell, and somewhere 3 kilometers west, Aldrich was sitting in his quarters watching his career end. Stood there and understood that nothing would ever be the same. Not for me, not for the battalion, not for anyone who'd learned tonight that the quietest soldiers sometimes carry the loudest truths. And that truth, when finally heard, changes everything. They let me stay on the tower for another hour. Not because the sector needed watching. 2nd Squad had taken up positions along the eastern perimeter. Richmond had called in proper defensive coverage. The threat was gone. Broken. scattered into the Alaskan wilderness where hypothermia would finish what my rifle had started. They let me stay because I needed the time, needed to sit with what I'd done before the machinery of military justice ground forward and turned this night into testimony and evidence and official findings. I cleaned my rifle, hands moving through familiar motions while my mind processed everything else. Field strip, bore brush through the barrel, oil on the bolt, reassemble, function check, 11 rounds fired, 11 casings collected and placed in a small plastic bag that would become evidence. 11 human beings who'd woken up this morning not knowing they'd die tonight on a frozen Alaskan hillside at the hands of a soldier they never saw. I tried not to think about them as people, tried to maintain the professional distance that lets soldiers do terrible things and still sleep at night, but my mind wouldn't cooperate. It kept showing me the machine gunner settling behind his weapon, the radio operator trying to call for help, the commander rallying his troops, professional soldiers doing their jobs, just like me. The only difference was I'd been better at it tonight. Lieutenant Thorne climbed back up the ladder at 0630 hours. Dawn was maybe an hour away, though you couldn't tell in the storm, just gradual lightening of the darkness, black to dark gray to lighter gray. Corporal Colonel Vance wants to see you. Now! I nodded, stood. My legs didn't want to work properly. 17 minutes of combat followed by an hour of sitting motionless in sub-zero temperatures. My body was staging a protest. I slung my rifle, followed Thorne down the ladder. My hand slipped twice on the frozen rungs. He steadied me without comment. A Humvee waited at the base of the tower, Richmond at the wheel, Declan in the back. They'd brought my cold weather gear, the parka I'd left behind when adrenaline made me forget that human bodies have limits. I climbed into the back seat. Declan handed me a thermos of coffee. I wrapped my numb fingers around it, felt nothing, drank anyway. The drive to battalion headquarters took 15 minutes. Nobody spoke. What was there to say? Richmond knew. Thorne knew. Declan probably suspected. And I was too tired to explain what they already understood. The Tactical Operations Center sat at the heart of Fort Wainwright, a low concrete building designed to survive anything short of direct artillery strike. Inside it was warm, fluorescent bright. A dozen soldiers working computers and radios and maps covered in colored pins and grease pencil marks. They all stopped when I walked in, stopped and stared. Word had spread. Of course it had. 11 enemy KIA, single shooter, eastern flank held against platoon-strength assault, the kind of story that races through a battalion faster than official reports. I ignored them. Followed Thorne to a small office at the back, the colonel's office. Door closed. 2 MPs standing guard. One of them opened the door. Corporal Winters to see Colonel Vance. I stepped inside. The office was small, functional, maps on one wall, awards and photos on another, a desk covered in folders and reports, and the organized chaos of a battalion commander during training operations. Colonel Marcus Vance sat behind the desk. 54 years old, 2 silver stars visible on his awards rack. The kind of officer who'd earned his rank through competence instead of politics. Lines on his face that spoke of hard decisions made in harder places. 3 other people were in the room. Captain Aldrich stood against the left wall, no longer in the operations center, no longer in command, just another officer waiting to learn his fate. His face was pale, jaw tight, hands clasped behind his back in parade rest that looked more like a man holding himself together through force of will. And 3 civilians sat in chairs facing the desk. The older woman stood when I entered, mid-40s, gray streaking through brown hair, eyes that had seen combat and carried the weight of it the way all veterans do. Corporal Winters, her voice was steady, familiar somehow. I'm Bryn Holloway. We haven't met. But we have something in common. She gestured to the two people beside her. Marcus Webb, Tessa Carver. Understanding hit me. The pattern victims. Aldrich's previous mistakes. The soldiers he'd dismissed and buried and transferred when they'd been right and he'd been wrong. They'd come here, driven through a blizzard, force their way onto a military base during training operations. To do what, save me, warn me, bear witness. Vance gestured to an empty chair. Sit, Corporal. I sat, still holding my rifle, couldn't seem to let it go. The colonel opened a folder. My personnel file, the one Thorne should have read 3 weeks ago, the one Aldrich never bothered with because he'd already decided who I was before looking at what I'd done. Corporal Jade Winters, age 27, 6 years active duty, sniper qualified, 2 combat deployments, expert marksman, 12 confirmed engagements before tonight. He looked up, met my eyes. 13 questions for you. I need honest answers. This isn't a court-martial, not yet. This is me trying to understand what the hell happened on my watch. Yes, sir. Question 1. Did you receive direct orders from Captain Aldrich to cease fire? Yes, sir, 3 times. First, when I reported possible movement. Second, when I reported visual confirmation. Third, after the engagement, when he claimed I was shooting friendly forces. Did you obey those orders? No, sir. Why not? I met his eyes. Because they were unlawful orders, sir. An order to stand by while enemy forces assault your position is an order to abandon your post and fail your mission. I had a duty to defend the eastern sector. I did my duty. Vance nodded slowly, made a note. Question 2. How many enemy combatants did you engage? 11 confirmed kills, sir. Possibly more wounded who withdrew. I maintained visual observation through my scope and documented each engagement. Documented how, phone camera, sir, video and audio recording of the entire engagement. 17 minutes from first shot to last, including all radio communications with Captain Aldrich refusing fire support. Aldrich made a sound, something between a cough and a groan. Vance silenced him with a look. You recorded everything. Yes, sir. Following advice from Sergeant Major Rowan Mackenzie, retired. He recommended I document any situations where my observations conflicted with command decisions. Said I'd need evidence if things went wrong. Smart advice. Vance made another note. Question 3. Did you know Captain Aldrich had falsified intelligence assessments before tonight? This was it. The moment where I could destroy Aldrich completely or show mercy I didn't owe him. I thought about Bryn Holloway, 6 wounded soldiers in Beirut, Marcus Webb. His career ended for questioning supply discrepancies. Tessa Carver, punished for being right. Andrew Kozlowski, his leg gone because Staff Sergeant Brennan wouldn't listen. I thought about the 11 bodies in the snow, the 47 soldiers in my battalion who'd be going home, because I'd ignored orders and done my job anyway. Mercy didn't enter into it. Truth did. 2 weeks before the engagement, sir, I observed Captain Aldrich misrepresenting intelligence assessments to higher command. The actual report indicated Eastern approach was viable under adverse weather conditions. Captain Aldrich reported to battalion that Western approach was the only threat axis. Did you report this discrepancy? To Lieutenant Thorne, sir. He advised me I had no proof and pursuing it would end my career. Thorne, standing behind me, made a small sound. Shame, probably. The sound of a man confronting his failures. So you prepared anyway? Yes, sir. I spent 2 weeks building defensive positions on OP7, created range cards, tested ammunition in cold weather conditions, built wind tables, improved the firing position. If the attack came east, I wanted to be ready. Vance leaned back in his chair, studied me for a long moment. You prepared for a battle nobody believed would happen, prepared alone, without support. without recognition. Why? Because it's my job, sir. Your job was to observe and report, not to single-handedly defeat a platoon-strength assault. My job is to protect American soldiers, sir. That's what the oath says. Support and defend. Not support and defend unless your commander is incompetent. Not support and defend unless you're on a post nobody takes seriously. I heard my voice rising and forced it level. I took an oath. I kept it, that's all. Silence in the office. The only sound was wind against the windows and the distant hum of the operations center. Bryn Holloway spoke. "Colonel, if I may." Vance nodded. 8 years ago in Beirut, I reported enemy movement patterns to Captain Aldrich. Specific locations, specific timing. He dismissed my report as speculation. 6 soldiers were wounded in the attack I predicted. I was transferred to a logistics unit within 2 weeks. My tactical analysis career ended because I made him look bad. Marcus Webb stood. 5 years ago in Iraq, I identified supply chain discrepancies, equipment going missing, requisitions that didn't match inventory. I filed a formal report following proper procedure. Captain Aldrich buried it, called me a troublemaker. I left the Army rather than fight a system that protected him. Tessa Carver was last, younger than the others, still carrying the anger that time hadn't yet smoothed into resignation. 2 years ago in Afghanistan, I identified training deficiencies in defensive protocols, gaps in our coverage. I reported them. Captain Aldrich gave me Article 15 for disrespect, said I was questioning his leadership. Maybe I was, but I was also right. She looked at Aldrich. How many soldiers got hurt because you couldn't admit you missed something? How many careers did you end to protect yours? Aldrich's face was white. I made tactical decisions based on available intelligence. Sometimes soldiers disagree. That's not a crime. That's the chain of command. The chain of command isn't a shield for incompetence, Vance said quietly. It's a structure of responsibility. Every decision flows up and down. You're responsible for those beneath you and accountable to those above you. He opened another folder. Which brings us to the IT forensics report. Aldrich went very still. At 05:21 hours this morning, you attempted to access classified intelligence files from your personal terminal. Files related to threat assessment for this training operation. You attempted to delete them. Vance read from the report. IT security flagged the attempt, recovered the files, and found something interesting. He slid a printout across the desk. 2 documents side by side. The original intelligence assessment and the briefing slides Aldrich had presented to battalion command. They weren't even close to the same. Original assessment says, and I quote, "Enemy likely to exploit adverse weather conditions for assault on secondary approaches. Eastern and southern sectors assessed as viable under heavy snow and reduced visibility. Your briefing says western approach confirmed as primary threat axis. All resources to be allocated accordingly." Vance looked up. "You changed the intelligence to fit your preconceptions. Then, when you were proven wrong, you tried to destroy the evidence. Sir, I interpreted the raw intelligence based on my experience. You falsified reports, you endangered soldiers, and when Corporal Winters tried to save lives, you ordered her to stand down so you wouldn't have to admit you were wrong." Vance's voice could have cut steel. "How many soldiers have paid for your ego over the years?" Aldrich said nothing. What could he say? The evidence was there. The pattern was clear. The truth was unavoidable. Vance turned to me. "Corporal Winters, I'm convening an Article 32 hearing, preliminary investigation. Captain Aldrich will face charges of falsifying intelligence reports, refusing to support troops in contact, conduct unbecoming an officer, and attempted destruction of evidence. You'll be called as a witness. This will happen in 72 hours. Be ready." "Yes, sir." Until then, you're relieved of duty. Get some sleep. See medical. You've been in sub-zero conditions for 12 hours, and I'm not having you collapse from hypothermia before you can testify." "Sir, I'd like to return to OP7. Vance blinked. "Corporal, you just fought a 17-minute engagement alone. You've earned rest." "The eastern sector still needs watching, sir. If I don't go back, it sends a message that the post doesn't matter. That what happened tonight was an exception. It wasn't. It was proof that every position matters. I'd like to go back and finish my watch." The colonel studied me. "You understand that if you return to OP7, I'm sending a full squad with you. Upgraded equipment, enhanced communications. This isn't punishment detail anymore." "I understand, sir. That's what it should have been all along." He nodded slowly. "Dismissed corporal, and Winters. What you did tonight saved lives. My job is to make sure the people who need to know that learn it. Your job is to survive long enough for me to do mine." I stood, saluted, turned to leave. Bryn Holloway caught my arm as I passed. "You did what we couldn't," she said quietly. "You proved it, documented it, made it impossible to bury. Thank you." I nodded, couldn't speak. The weight of what she was really saying, that I'd vindicated all of them given their sacrifices, meaning proved they'd been right all along, was too much. I walked out of the office, past the MPs, past the soldiers in the operations center who stopped and saluted, even though I was enlisted and they didn't have to. Walked out into the Alaskan morning where the storm was finally breaking, and the first light of dawn was turning the snow from black to gray to white. Richmond was waiting by the Humvee. "Where to?" "Corporal." "OP7 Sergeant, I've got a watch to finish." The Article 32 hearing convened 72 hours later in a conference room that smelled like industrial cleaner and bad coffee. I wore my dress uniform, the one I kept for ceremonies and formal occasions. It felt strange after 3 days in cold weather gear, stiff, uncomfortable, like wearing someone else's skin. Colonel Vance presided. A JAG captain served as investigating officer, military equivalent of a prosecutor gathering evidence to determine if charges were warranted. Aldrich sat at the defense table with 2 military lawyers. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The authority that came with rank and position stripped away, leaving just a man facing the consequences of his choices. The gallery was full. Officers I'd never met, senior NCOs who'd heard the story and wanted to see how it ended. Bryn Holloway, Marcus Webb, and Tessa Carver in civilian clothes in the back row. And Rowan Mackenzie in his dress uniform, despite retirement ribbons and medals catching the fluorescent light. He caught my eye and nodded once. "Your father would be proud." The investigating officer called the hearing to order. "Read the charges." They sounded worse when spoken aloud in legal language. Falsifying official documents, dereliction of duty, conduct unbecoming an officer, attempted destruction of evidence. Each one carried potential for court-martial, for dismissal from service, for federal prosecution if they wanted to push it that far. "The government calls Corporal Jade Winters." I stood, walked to the witness chair, raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth. The investigating officer was a captain named Morrison, late 30s. Looks like he'd spent more time with law books than rifles. But his questions were sharp, precise. He knew exactly what he needed to establish. "Corporal Winters, please describe the events of January 14th, beginning with your assignment to OP7. I told them. Everything. The briefing where Aldrich dismissed me, the 2 weeks of preparation, the intelligence discrepancy I'd observed, my reports to Lieutenant Thorne, the night of the assault, the radio calls, the refusals, the decision to engage anyway. Morrison let me talk, didn't interrupt. When I finished, he entered evidence. Exhibit A, original intelligence assessment dated January 10th. He projected it on the screen. Everyone could read it. Eastern approach viable under adverse weather. Southern sectors exposed. Recommend distributed defensive posture. Exhibit B, Captain Aldrich's briefing to Battalion Command same date. The slide appeared. Western approach confirmed primary threat. All resources allocated accordingly. Side by side, the discrepancy was impossible to ignore. Exhibit C audio and video recording from OP7, January 14th, 0440 to 0504 hours. This was it. The moment I documented everything for. Morrison played the file. My voice emerged from speakers. This is Corporal Jade Winters OP7, January 14th, 0440 hours. I have visual confirmation of enemy platoon advancing on eastern approach. I have requested fire support 3 times. Captain Aldrich has denied all requests. I am engaging with available weapons. Then the shots, 11 of them, spaced across 17 minutes, each one followed by my documentation, range, conditions, target identification, timestamp, and between the shots, radio traffic. My requests for support, Aldrich's refusals, his final order to cease fire or face court-martial. The room was silent. 40 people listening to a battle unfold through audio, listening to a soldier do her job while her commander ordered her to stop. When it finished, Morrison turned to me. Corporal Winters, when Captain Aldrich ordered you to cease fire, did you consider obeying? Yes, sir. Why didn't you? Because I had visual confirmation of enemy forces assaulting my position. Because 47 American soldiers were sleeping 3 kilometers west, and this assault was designed to flank their position. Because my oath is to support and defend, not to obey unlawful orders from officers protecting their egos. One of Aldrich's lawyers started to object. The investigating officer waved him off. Let me be clear, Corporal, you're saying Captain Aldrich's order was unlawful. Yes, sir. An order to cease defending your assigned sector while under enemy assault is an order to abandon your post and fail your mission. That's unlawful, regardless of who gives it. Morrison nodded. No further questions for this witness. Aldrich's lead attorney stood. He was older, experienced. The kind of defense counsel who'd made a career of finding reasonable doubt in impossible situations. Corporal Winters, isn't it possible you misidentified the threat? That in darkness and storm conditions you mistook friendly forces for enemy? No, sir. How can you be certain? Because I watched them through a scope for 4 minutes before engaging. Because I identified tactical formations and equipment consistent with hostile forces. Because they were advancing on my position from outside our perimeter. And because Sergeant Richmond confirmed visual identification from an independent observation point. But you fired without authorization. I fired in defense of my assigned sector, sir. That's my authorization. That's my job. Even when your commanding officer ordered you not to, especially then, sir, because if I'd obeyed that unlawful order, 11 enemy combatants would have reached our perimeter. They would have flanked our sleeping soldiers. People would have died. My job is to prevent that, not to protect Captain Aldrich's ego. The attorney's face reddened. I'm not asking about egos, Corporal. I'm asking about chain of command, about discipline, about the fundamental structure that makes military operations possible. So am I, sir. I kept my voice level. Chain of command flows both directions. Soldiers obey lawful orders. Officers protect their soldiers. When an officer prioritizes his reputation over his troops' lives, the chain is broken. I was trying to restore it. The attorney tried several more approaches, suggested I'd panicked, that I'd exaggerated the threat, that I'd disobeyed orders because of personal animosity toward Aldrich. I answered each question the same way, with facts, with documentation, with the truth that was impossible to argue against because I'd been smart enough to record it. Finally, he gave up, sat down, Morrison called his next witness, Sergeant Richmond, who testified he'd observed the engagement from 3 kilometers and confirmed enemy forces, confirmed my accuracy, confirmed that I'd saved the eastern flank. Then Lieutenant Thorne, who admitted he'd failed to read my personnel file, failed to utilize my skills properly, failed to investigate my concerns about the intelligence discrepancy. His testimony was painful to watch, a young officer destroying his own career with honesty, but he did it anyway, told the truth even though it made him look incompetent. I respected that. Then Bryn Holloway took the stand. She described Beirut, her accurate intelligence reports, Aldrich's dismissal, 6 wounded soldiers who wouldn't have been if he'd listened, Marcus Webb, Iraq, supply discrepancies. His career ended for being right. Tessa Carver, Afghanistan, training deficiencies, punished for identifying problems. The pattern emerged. 3 deployments, 3 incidents. 3 soldiers silenced for threatening Aldrich's image of competence. And now me, the 4th. Except this time, the soldier had documented everything. This time, the truth couldn't be buried. The investigating officer called Captain Aldrich to testify in his own defense. He took the stand. Sworn in. His lawyers had probably told him not to testify, but he did anyway. Pride, maybe. Or the belief that he could explain his way out. He couldn't. Captain Aldrich, did you modify the intelligence assessment before briefing battalion command? I interpreted raw intelligence based on my operational experience. That's my job as operations officer. Did you include in your briefing the assessment that Eastern approach was viable under adverse weather? I didn't consider that assessment credible. Based on what analysis? My professional judgment. Your professional judgment that resulted in 11 enemy combatants reaching within 440 meters of our perimeter before being stopped by a single soldier you'd assigned to what you called, and I quote, diversity duty. Aldrich had no answer. Morrison continued, did you attempt to delete intelligence files at 05:21 hours on January 14th? I was trying to prevent classified information from being misinterpreted. By destroying it, by securing it. Captain, the IT forensics report shows you initiated a delete command, not a security protocol. A delete command. Are you saying you accidentally tried to erase evidence of your mistakes? I made no mistakes. I made tactical decisions that circumstances invalidated. Circumstances being that you were wrong and Corporal Winters was right. I was responsible for the entire battalion. She was responsible for one observation post, different perspective. Different enough that you ordered her to cease fire while enemy forces assaulted her position. I believed she was engaging false targets in poor visibility. Despite her repeated reports, despite her documented visual confirmation, despite her 6 years of experience and expert marksman qualification, and 12 previous combat engagements. You believed your judgment from 3 kilometers away was superior to hers from 600 meters with direct visual contact. Aldrich's face was pale. I made a command decision. You made a career decision, Captain. You chose protecting your reputation over protecting your soldiers. And when Corporal Winters refused to let American troops die for your ego, you tried to destroy the evidence. The questioning continued for another hour. By the end, Aldrich looked broken, defeated, the reality of what he'd done settling onto shoulders that weren't strong enough to carry it. The panel deliberated for 47 minutes. When they returned, the investigating officer read their findings. The investigating panel finds sufficient evidence to recommend general court-martial on all charges. Captain Derek Aldrich, you are hereby remanded to confinement pending trial. This hearing is concluded. 2 MPs approached Aldrich. They didn't put him in handcuffs, professional courtesy, but they escorted him from the room under guard. His career was over. Everyone knew it. The court-martial would be formality, the evidence too strong, the pattern too clear. Colonel Vance approached me as the room emptied. "Corporal Winters, walk with me." We stepped outside. The Alaskan afternoon was clear, cold, beautiful in the way that deadly places sometimes are. "You did good work," Vance said, "in combat and here. What you did on that tower saved lives. What you did in that hearing room might save more. You proved that competence matters, that truth matters, that one soldier with courage can change a broken system." "I just did my job, sir." "No, you did more than your job. Your job was to observe. You chose to act, to document, to stand up when standing up could cost you everything." He paused. "I'm recommending you for the Bronze Star with Valor device, and I'm offering you immediate transfer to Battalion's Scout Sniper section. Elite assignment, the recognition you deserve." I looked east, toward OP-7, toward the tower where I'd spent 2 weeks building something that mattered from nothing anyone else cared about. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I'd like to stay on OP-7. Vance blinked. "Corporal, you just proved you're one of the best shooters in this division. Scout Sniper section is where you belong. Why stay at an observation post?" "Because someone needs to take the Eastern Sector seriously, sir. Someone needs to prove that every position matters when taken seriously." I met his eyes. "Make OP-7 a permanent 2-person post. Upgrade the equipment. Give them direct fire support authority. And let me stay there. Let me train the next rotation. Show them how to take their jobs seriously, even when nobody else thinks it matters." Vance studied me for a long moment. "You want to turn a joke post into a model position." "I want to prove that there are no joke posts, sir. Only soldiers who take their jobs seriously and soldiers who don't. I choose to be the first kind." He smiled, small but genuine. "Granted, OP-7 is now officially designated Eastern Sentinel Post. 2-person rotation, upgraded shelter, enhanced communications, direct fire authority. You call it, we deliver it. No questions asked." He extended his hand. "And Corporal, thank you for reminding me why I put on this uniform 40 years ago." I shook his hand. "Just doing the work, sir." "Somebody's always watching, Corporal. You taught us that." 6 months later, I stood on OP-7, watching the sunrise paint the Alaskan landscape in shades of gold and pink and purple that didn't seem real. The tower had been rebuilt, proper shelter now, reinforced structure, enhanced communication suite, everything a professional observation post should be. Corporal Diana Reeves sat at the second firing position. 32 years old, 12 years in service, combat veteran, expert marksman, underestimated her whole career until she wasn't anymore. She'd arrived 3 months ago, heard the stories, wanted to learn from the soldier who'd held the eastern flank alone. We'd become friends, the kind of friendship that forms between people who understand what it means to do invisible work and not need applause. "Contact CE," Diana said quietly. "Bearing 085, range approximately 900 meters. I brought my binoculars up, scanned, found the movement. A convoy, American vehicles, heading back from training exercise in the northern sector. "Confirm friendly, sir," I said. 3 Humvees, 1 supply truck. Grid November Delta 4835. Diana keyed the radio. "Eastern Sentinel to actual. Friendly convoy inbound 3 vehicles plus 1 supply, estimated arrival 15 minutes. The response came back immediately. Professional, respectful. "Copy Eastern Sentinel. We have them on scope. Thanks for the confirmation." No dismissal, no irritation, no suggestion that we were wasting their time, because they'd learned. The battalion had learned. The Army had learned. Aldrich's court-martial had ended with dishonorable discharge reduction to E1 and 18 months in military prison. His father, the retired general, had tried to intervene, had tried to call in favors, had tried to minimize the damage. Colonel Vance had shut him down with 6 words, "Your son endangered American soldiers," repeatedly. That was the end of it. Lieutenant Thorne had faced his own consequences. Letter of reprimand in his permanent file, removed from command, but not kicked out, not destroyed, given a chance to learn and grow and be better. He'd taken that chance. Last I heard, he was executive officer for a logistics company, doing good work, reading personnel files, listening to his soldiers. Bryn Holloway was now a civilian consultant for battalion intelligence, reviewing threat assessments, making sure what happened to her never happened again. Marcus Webb had returned to service, civilian contractor with special operations, supply chain analysis. The work he'd tried to do 5 years ago finally valued. Tessa Carver was teaching defensive tactics at Fort Benning, training the next generation, making sure they understood that identifying problems wasn't disrespect. It was duty. And Rowan Mackenzie visited every Sunday, brought coffee and stories about my father, sat with me while the sun rose and told me I was making Everett proud. The Bronze Star ceremony had happened 4 months ago. Small formation. Colonel Vance pinning the medal to my dress uniform while the battalion stood in ranks. I'd saluted, shaken hands, walked back to my position. The medal lived in my footlocker now, under my bunk in the barracks. Nobody saw it unless they were looking for it specifically, because the medal wasn't the point. The recognition wasn't the point. The work was the point. The work had always been the point. At battalion headquarters, there was a small display case in the main hallway. 11 brass casings arranged in precise rows, each one polished, each one marked with a number. The plaque read, OP-7 Eastern Sentinel, Corporal Jade Winters 11 rounds, 47 lives saved, January 14th, 2024. Every position matters, every soldier matters. New protocols had been implemented. All observer reports now required written acknowledgement and investigation before dismissal. Chain of accountability documented at every level. Personnel files were read completely before assignments. Skills matched to positions with deliberate thought. No more waste. No more burying competence in positions where it couldn't shine. Change had happened. Systemic change. The kind that outlasted individual careers and individual battles. All because one soldier had refused to be invisible. My radio crackled. Eastern Sentinel, this is actual. Status report. I keyed the mic. All clear, sir. Watching. Brief pause, then Colonel Vance's voice. He still checked in personally sometimes. Reminder that someone was paying attention. That the work mattered. We know you are, Corporal. We know. I set the handset down, returned to my scope, scanned the eastern approach where 11 bodies had lain in the snow 6 months ago. The snow had melted. Spring was coming to Alaska. New growth, new seasons, the landscape transforming from white death to green life. But the lessons remained. Diana spoke without looking up from her position. You ever regret it? Staying here instead of Scout Sniper section? I thought about it. Really thought. Considered all the recognition I'd turned down, all the opportunities I'd declined, all the career advancement I'd sacrificed to stay on this tower nobody used to care about. No, I said finally. This is where I need to be, where I can do the most good, not by being the best shooter. By proving that taking your position seriously matters more than the position itself, even the ones nobody watches, especially those, because that's when character shows, when nobody's watching, when nobody expects anything, when you could coast and nobody would know. I adjusted my scope. That's when you prove who you are, Diana nodded. Your father taught you that. My father. And every NCO who ever gave a damn about doing things right instead of doing things easy. I smiled. Now I'm teaching you. Yes, Corporal. We sat in silence, watching, waiting, ready. Because that's what sentinels do. We watch, we prepare, We stand when standing matters, even when nobody believes we should, especially then. The radio was quiet, the sector was clear, the work continued, and somewhere in battalion headquarters, 11 brass casings caught the morning light, a reminder that competence and courage when they meet can change everything. I learned that on OP7, and I'll never forget.